We're just coming out of winter over here in Australia, but not all is doom and gloom. In today's video, I want to show you 10 plants I grow in moss poles that have been thriving over the last couple of months. Hey everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Most recently I uploaded quite a few videos showing you the not so glamorous side of growing houseplants, especially over the cooler season. Enough of the negativity. Today I really want to show you some really nice plants. Now, while it is still cold and dark and rainy outside and my plants in the garden are having a hard time, when it comes to indoors, my plants aren't experiencing the same challenges. Yes, it is darker, but I heavily supplement using grow lights, and I've got all of the grow lights that I use linked in the description as well. Yes, it's cooler, but I'm heating my house for my own sake, so the house stays at a decent 20-ish degrees on average. Now at night time it can go down to 16-ish degrees inside, but I'll quickly heat it back up in the mornings. I'm quite lucky. Winters in Sydney are quite wet, so naturally the humidity is actually quite high, especially if we're considering that cooler air can absorb less water. The relative humidity during winter is actually pretty good for most of my tropical plants, averaging around 70%. So overall, the conditions for these plants inside, even during winter, are really, really good, and I have been experiencing some amazing growth over the last couple of months. Let's start off right over here. This is my Philodendron melanochrysum. I also like to refer to it as Philodendron melanochrysum because it is a bit of a crisis / mission to get a plant to mature. Now, this plant has been one of my very first plants in the collection, and about 4 years ago it looked something like this. So I really started this plant from the tiniest possible plant. I did not purchase a mature specimen, and it took a long time for it to finally show me some nice mature growth. This is by far the biggest leaf it has ever grown, and it literally is still unfurling or still hardening off right now. I actually captured a time lapse of this leaf unfurling. It took a whopping 3 weeks for it to unfurl and inflate because it is of a decent size, and you should be seeing that on the side somewhere. So I am really happy with this plant at the moment. There are a couple on here as well. There's another growth point down here, and there is actually another 2 in the pot down here, but yeah, they're going to be left behind with the next chop, that's for certain. But overall, really happy with this plant's growth. It is the sexiest it has ever looked, and I just don't know, like once a Milano is growing really nicely and mature, the dark leaves, the velvet texture, the nice veining, the elongated shape, I think it's hard to beat. Even the second shoot down here is doing some nice things as well. So really happy with this plant at the moment, and the newest shoot is only to here, so I still have a little bit to go. So I'm hoping that this plant can continuously mature. Previous to that, whenever the plant was finally giving me a nice leaf, like this one over here, it also then reached the top of the pole. I had to chop it and then set it back a little bit, which then, caused some smaller leaves to pop out again. But this time around, I feel like I've got a little bit more room for the plant to grow. I'm also hoping that the plant is going to reduce its internodal spacing as it matures. So hopefully I can get another 3 or 4 leaves on this pole before it reaches the top. I would love another 3 or 4 of these big leaves over here. Oh my god, I could stroke this leaf all day. Wow, we're already getting filthy. A plant doesn't always have to be ginormous to steal my heart. This one is a Philodendron verrucosum titanium. Now, what makes the titanium is it being crossed with serpents. Let me bring you a bit closer. I mean, the sheen on these leaves is unmatched, honestly. I think that has an amazing sheen. It's not quite as velvety as a normal Philodendron verrucosum, but it has this kind of sheen that the Majestic has as well. Super nice, very pretty. I do think it has a more elongated shape compared to a normal verrucosum, which would explain the serpent's heritage. It still has beautiful red backs as we are used to with verrues, so that stole my heart. And look at how hairy the petioles are. I mean, That just looks so cool. Serpents also has hairy petioles, so I'm not surprised by that. This is only the third leaf it's grown in my care. This one was the first one, second one and third one, and you can really see a decent continuous increase in leaf size for this plant, so I know that I'm doing well with this plant. It is currently in my IKEA cabinet, so it gets consistent light, consistent high humidity, consistent airflow, and it seems to really enjoy that. But still early days for me in this plant. I don't know all too much about it, but I know that it really likes me at the moment, and I very much like it back. Next up, we've got my Philodendron Splendid. Now technically it has seen better times. Specifically about 2 months ago it looked much better, because 2 months ago I just gave it a chop. But it was way too large, way too top heavy, and also reached the top of its moss pole. So I had to give it a chop. As part of that, naturally you just halved your plant, so it kind of gonna look half as impressive. But given that I chopped it during winter, it's actually doing really well. It has already pushed out this leaf since then. Now I would say it's maybe a tiny bit smaller than the leaf prior to that, which would have been this one. Definitely a little bit smaller, but that's to be expected given that I just chopped it and we're not in like the peak of the season, or like not in the peak season. But the fact that it even has already pushed out a new leaf, and that leaf being nice and large, and the new caterpillar over here is already really large again, makes me really happy. You can also see this plant has a super well established root system within the moss pole over here, including the newest node over here. Now don't freak out if some of these roots aren't going into the moss pole. That's okay. There's still going to be plenty of roots within the moss pole. They're just fine. Well, they add to the look. So this one is on the list not because it's the largest plant it's ever been or it has the largest leaves it ever had. This one is on the list because it's honestly so easy going. Like, despite chop and extending, despite doing this during the coldest time of the year, the plant is continuously growing and making my life just so easy. So such a hardy but rewarding grower. Can't not include that in the list. Let's do one big, one small, huh? This one is my Monstera obliqua. Now this one was a very inexpensive plant I got from a local nursery called Nursery to You, and they've come out of tissue culture and set me back a whopping, I think, 25 bucks each. So I bought 2, and I put 2 in here, and one of them even came with 2 shoots, so there's actually 3 on here at the moment. A couple of years ago this plant would have sent you back 5 digits. It used to be really expensive and rare, and I think a lot of people just liked it because it was expensive and rare. I personally actually just really like the fenestrations. I think the dainty little look, I really like it, and I really like that it stays quite small and juvenile and rather lush instead. So gives me a good break from having to find a spot that suits a really big plant. That's one of my biggest challenges these days, where to put these plants. So this one is nice and stays in my IKEA cabinet, and I think it's going to be able to stay in my IKEA cabinet for quite a long time. I've given it a grow vertical pole, and you can see one shoot here. This one has started growing up the pole as well, but there's another shoot just stuck down here and another one here, actually, like still in the pot. So despite the fact that it is growing really rapidly and growing really nice leaves, a little bit of sun stress over here, but nothing to worry about. Newest leaf over here, a new leaf unfurling right here and coming out of here. So there is things happening, there's volume, right? Not the next leaf that's unfurling is not going to take 3 weeks, and it's not going to shoot the lights out and be the size of my torso, but there's 3 or 4 leaves unfurling at any given time. So it is still a really rewarding grower, specifically if you consider its history and how desirable it used to be and so on. But at the end of the day, I don't really care about the desirability of a plant or the worth of a plant and so on. I bought this not because it used to be valuable. I bought this because I genuinely actually just like monsteras and I like fenestrations, and I think this one is quite unique in that sense. It was just sold to me as obliqua, but I think it's the Peruvian form, but don't quote me. It's definitely just tissue cultured. Next up, an all-time favorite. Monstera deliciosa variegata, and look at this newest leaf over here. It finally is having really nice variegation. I'm so excited. And this is the winter leaf. It has the most fenestrations out of any of the leaves that is ever grown and the best variegation. And all of that by just relying on natural light. The velvets come from my office. I've got a big wall of aeroids in there with supported by my mother lights. The small plants were all in my IKEA cabinet supported by my Soltec growth. This one is just getting natural light and it doesn't mind it at all. I could probably optimize the growth even further if I would supplement light, but you know, it doesn't suit the corner of the room that it lives in. And at the end of the day, definitely not complaining. I have always had the most challenges with variegation with this plant. I feel like my plant has never really given me the nicest variegation, which is a bit of a blessing as well because it didn't have that much variegation. It's actually growing really nicely, right? Because the green is what contributes to photosynthesis. But it's another plant that I've had for 4 years and it really, really slowly matures for me. I do believe because of the variegation and because of frequent chopping as well. You can see a ginormous root system in and around the moss pole, specifically at the bottom over here. This is the bottom part of the pole that obviously had much more time to establish, and this is the part that has grown now more recently. Again, I'm not mad if some of these roots are missing the pole. I think there's plenty of roots, and if there wasn't, the plant wouldn't be rewarding me with nice leaves. Right? However, the stem was kind of moving off the pole a little bit, so you can see I've got a piece of wire over here that I just pinned the plant to the pole to tell it, hey, grow in here, but then once the roots over here are starting to attach properly, then I can get rid of this wire. Some say there's like small form, large form, all of these forms. I don't really know, but what I have noticed is that this petiole over here, it is showing some small little ruffles, which is supposed to be like a sign of maturity for the large form. But then some people say, oh, this can't be large form, otherwise it would be much larger and wouldn't be growing with such large internodal spacing. But then I've also read that, you know what, large form and small form, they're all just deliciosas, just at different levels of maturity. So to be honest, I don't know. There's people that have looked into monsteras in much more detail and are probably in a much better position to give you an answer. My answer is that ultimately it is my form. It is exactly what I grow it into. If it grows large, then it's large form. If it grows small, then it's small form. At the end of the day, it's the form that I want it to be. I don't care if it's technically small form, large form, Boschiana, deliciosa, or whatever. It is what it is and it's bloody sexy. So I'm very excited. I'm just so thrilled with this newest leaf. Really, really happy about this. This is Philodendron patriciae, and one of the more recent additions to my collection. Would have been just about a year old, and I do believe that next month there should be a specific video about this plant coming. This is its newest leaf. You can really see these classic patriciae features, that like texture, almost like it has abs. It is growing a new leaf over here, so happy days. And I only recently put it on this pole over here as well. You can see some roots going into the pole and you can see some of these roots already coming out the top. Now I'm not going to do anything with that. If I would put another pole on top, these roots would continuously grow until they reach that as well and so on. It is in my IKEA cabinet, so a really high humidity environment. That's why these roots don't instantly dry out, but I rather have these roots focus on secondary roots and establish a larger root system within this pole instead. But yeah, really nice plant because it grows really compact. It doesn't have large internodal spacing and it doesn't the leaves are kind of drooping down. So it's a perfect plant to hang somewhere. So mine is hanging in my IKEA cabinet and eventually it probably has to hang in my greenhouse. But I'm really, really excited about this one. This one can grow so nice. Like I love a mature version of this and I'll definitely take you on this journey with me as well. And another favorite of mine, I mean they're all my favorites, how could they not? This is Philodendron El Choco Red, aka Philodendron rubri juvenile. This journey started 20 months ago as the tiniest little tissue culture plant and I'm so happy with its progress. I've done a full 12-month progress video of this plant and I'm working on a second 12 months video, so you've got a 2-year video then. But yeah, I'm really, really excited about this plant. You can see that, look, I mean the bottom is a bit empty. By the way, this is all of the plant. I've never actually chopped and propagated this plant. I always just expanded that plant. So this has always been on this pole basically. So you can see that it lost all of its oldest leaves, which is fair. They would be about a year older, so which is pretty normal for velvets. These older leaves over here, you can see there's definitely have some yellow markings, yellow edges. Sometimes I cut them a little bit, because I don't like looking at them and so on. And that is okay. You also need to keep in mind that it is the colder season, and this plant also just relies on natural light. There's no grow light supporting this light. It's right in a south facing window, which has the worst exposure in the southern hemisphere, so not a lot of light for this plant during the colder months. And also because it's right next to the window, it would be exposed to the cold coming from the window. We have basically no insulation with our windows over here, so it is definitely a couple of degrees cooler right next to the window than further into the room. So I reckon that would explain these yellow edges, but also it's just normal. All leaves will eventually get there. But I'm more focused on the new growth, and you can see a consistent increase in leaf size with this plant up to this newest leaf being, is this not just a perfect heart shape? It has also beautiful texture, like again, super shiny, and I mean this is exactly what you grow these sort of plants for. But one thing that is a little bit unfortunate is that it loses its red. Here is a small offshoot of this plant. There was a couple of them on the pole, and you can see how dark the foliage is, and that darkness is exaggerated by the nice dark reds. It's called rubri juvenile because it's red when it's juvenile. You can see that these leaves over here still have the red, despite them being quite old. The red actually isn't fading as quickly as it does with a verrucosum, for example. Whereas the newest leaves have hardly, and the newest leaf actually has no more red, right? So this is just a feature that disappears with maturity, including the redness on the petiole as well. But instead, you get really nice large velvet leaves. So what I'm going to do in spring, oh, and of course you also get a super nice red caterpillar over here, which is also very sexy. What I'm going to do with this plant in spring is chop it in half, so I get rid of the ugly emptiness down here, and I'm going to propagate those nodes, and I'm going to grow a juvenile version of it so that I can also appreciate the red backs. The top half I will keep and try and continuously mature, so I still also get the nice large leaves. So that way I get the best of both worlds. And yeah, it's definitely a favorite. It's another one of these plants that probably, for me personally, has a lot of sentimental value, because it was one of these plants that wasn't available in Australia for the longest time, right? So I always wanted to complete my velvet collection. I'm still missing a luxuriance, but luxuriance and El Choco were just not available in Australia, and they were really readily available overseas, but we can't import due to biosecurity law. So technically you can, but it's way too big of an effort for a private person, man. So when that finally came out of tissue culture over here, I was just over the moon, because I just wanted this plant for so long, right? If it would have always been available, I might have not even liked it that much. But it has all of the features that I like. Red backs, velvet leaves, heart-shaped, easy grower. I find it very easy. So 10 out of 10 for this plant. Actually 11 out of 10 for this plant. I freaking love it. And yes, it's in a teeny tiny pot. Let me bring over a bigger pot so that it doesn't fall over. You cannot, no, I'm taking you with me. You cannot fall over. Oh my God, it's looking so nice. Another one that technically has seen better days, but I still want to include it because it's still one of my all-time faves, and it is still growing. So again, this one went through a chop and extend about a month ago, and it's now starting to push out its first leaf. This one over here, after the chop, significantly decreased in leaf size, but the plant wasn't the happiest leading up to the chop and extend. So I was kind of expecting that. It was also growing away from the moss pole, so there are a couple of nodes that didn't fully take advantage of the moss pole. I'm now trying to move it back over using a cable tie so it can actually root into the pole. And I think once it starts more thoroughly rooting into the pole again, it will also give me these bigger leaves again. Now these big leaves you see over here were grown in my greenhouse last summer. So obviously, as much as winter isn't such a big issue inside, these plants still definitely notice the difference between summer and winter. You just have more light and heat available during summer, and that is what most of these tropical plants really appreciate. With this one specifically, and because of all of its variegation, I think it also really appreciated the high light that it had in the greenhouse. Now I've given it the new Mother Life Spectrum, so that the light comes from the front, so that all of the leaves face forward. So I'm enjoying the aesthetics of this now. I just really hope that after this first initial leaf after the chop, that it goes back to growing larger leaves until it reaches the top. That would be ideal. But proof is in the pudding. Regardless, I do think that this plant is a stunning plant. It just has honestly the most amazing variegation. I can't believe how white this plant actually is, yet grows so well. So I definitely wanted to include this plant to give it a little pop of color. Oop. Alrighty, next up. In itself, it's not actually the nicest plant I've ever grown, I think, but it's a plant I haven't really spoken about much. So I did want to include it because, well, I am growing it and I think it's growing nicely. And I have plans for this plant. So this is Syngonium steyermarkii, and it looks so different to any of the other Syngoniums. Now, unfortunately, the light source for this one is coming from above, so I kind of just need to tilt the plant a little bit for you to actually see the beautiful leaves. I do think this has a really cool leaf texture and leaf shape, so I really like it. And it doesn't give me the weird Syngonium vibes, and I know that these can mature and get even larger and have like heaps of these little, whatever you call them. Now, a couple of things that I like about this plant. It is also very leggy, but again, I think there's just a lot of growth that has dropped over the winter months. It also has gone through many different positions because it's kind of like one of these filler plants, you know. I'm not gonna design my room around this plant. It's more like if I find a spare spot in my room, then this plant can go there. So it is a bit of a filler plant, so I'm not necessarily optimizing the light exposure for this and so on, but for what it is, I think it's growing really nicely. But what I really want to do is I want to create a much lusher display out of this. I don't like the emptiness in between the leaves. I much rather double or triple plant this plant going forward and then have a much lusher display. I actually did double plant it, but the second shoot is only here. So only one shoot has really shot the lights out and has started maturing and growing much faster. So this is made out of 3 Grow Vertical poles. All of the plastic backed poles are from Grow Vertical, and they're always linked in the description with a discount code. So there's 3 of them. So what I'll probably do in spring is I'll chop the bottom part off. The bottom part I'll put in the garden or something like that. And then I'll take these 2 and I'll put them next to each other to double the impact. I think that's what I'm gonna do. When I do it, I'll take you along. But for now, I still like this plant and I think it's a little more unique. It's something different that none of these other plants I showed you so far are kind of adding, if that makes sense. All right, and last but not least, my queen Anthurium. And I really wanted to include this because it is actually not looking perfect, but it's still super pretty, even if it's not perfect. This was, I think, its second latest leaf, and that unfurled in like February, March. So about half a year in, and you can definitely see some yellow discolorations and edges. These leaves are even older, and you can very prominently see some discolorations around the edges, right? So these leaves are just starting to give up a little bit. Now, I don't know if that's something that I'm doing wrong, if I'm watering it too much or too little or whatever. I think it's just time. This is its newest leaf that just recently unfurled. I don't know what happened here, but you know when they're teeny tiny and they come out, even just a teeny tiny scratch can turn into something really big as the plant unfurls. I also have a time lapse of that previous leaf unfurling. I hope then it makes more sense how something tiny could turn into a huge whole as the plant grows. But that's not a sign of the plant being unhappy or the conditions not being correct and so on. It's growing the biggest leaf ever and it's a really pretty leaf. It just has a little imperfection and I accept it for what it is. I can still be really happy about a plant and really enjoy a plant without the plant being 100% perfect. The other reason I wanted to include this is because this is actually one of the only plants that is not on a moss pole. It is on the grow vertical pole, but the grow vertical pole is filled with an aeroid mix that is very tree fern fiber heavy. You can also see actually an inflow. That thing sticking out down there, that's an inflow coming. So I will try and propagate this plant actually. Now this plant roots like crazy. Look at these roots everywhere. I don't have this in my normal chunky aeroid mix. It's in a more water retentive aeroid mix, so more tree fern fiber. And the same in the pole. And this plant is actually a climber. It climbs really slowly, but this is actually the second time I've grown it on a grow vertical pole, and the first time around it outgrew that grow vertical pole pretty quickly, and I then was able to take advantage of all of its propagation benefits. So I'll show you what the original grow vertical pole are filled with moss when I peeled off the plastic backing, how many roots were in that pole. Very good example of Anthuriums being a good candidate for a moss pole or grow pole. After the success with the moss, I really wanted to try a different medium, see if I can replicate that success. So far so good, but as the plant matures, it also seems to be climbing a little slower. So slower internodal spacing, so we're still at a very, very early stage on this pole, right? So I probably actually have to upgrade the pot before the plant would even reach the top of the moss pole, but see how we go. And that's it. Those were 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. I love doing these videos. I love showing you like the plants I'm really, really proud of, but I also really enjoyed the positive feedback on the back of showing my failures and reading that me showing my failures and openly talking about them actually helps you feel better about this hobby as well. So I hope I can keep it a good mix. By no means do I want to come across as everything is perfect in my collection and never experience any setbacks. But I also don't want to just constantly talk about things that go wrong, right? Like we all enjoy success, I suppose. And, you know, growing really nice large plants is what makes me really happy. It's why I started this hobby, why I am still in this hobby, and why I decided to make this YouTube channel as well, so I can share my joy and my knowledge with you guys. If you watched all the way, leave a comment down below letting me know which plant was your best grower on a moss pole over the last couple of months. And if you enjoyed it, please also give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please also subscribe to my channel. It's for free for you, but it really means the world to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!